Yeah, we're here to talk about the risks and the opportunities of an ocean transition. And I think that both Leticia Carvalho and Charlotte's remarks have set a very good backdrop for this. And I think that when we look at businesses in the ocean and how they account for their activities and their impact, I think first of all we have to really ask whether we can take such a transition that is in the title of this session for granted. And I think that question becomes more salient in an era when Trump is upending business policies in the US with consequences elsewhere. It's been the case that even before Trump, some large investors have backpedaled somewhat on environmental, social, and governance obligations. We saw that with BlackRock pulling back from some of its funds in September, and now it's become the owner of a large number of ports. But that's just one example. Anyway, to discuss these themes, I'm delighted to have here Suzanne Johnson, who is from the UN Global Compact Ocean Stewardship Coalition. We have Ninomiya Koichiro from Mitsui OSK Lines, and Alfredo Giron from the World Economic Forum. A wonderful group to have to discuss these things. So first of all, maybe, Suzanne, could I start with you? I mean, is it a given that companies will naturally disclose what they're doing in the ocean? What is the incentive for them to measure? What indeed do they measure, or should they measure? And are things changing? I'd love to ask, in fact, all of you about whether this transition is at a particularly perilous time.
Thank you, Dominic, and hello to everybody. Yes, I mean, this is a pivotal point, I would say, and our language, as we've talked about yesterday and today, is our language is changing in terms of how we talk about this transition, for sure. But you talked about, ocean industry and investors and, disclosure and measurement and managing risk, really, in terms of our impacts on the ocean. And just to say, by a way in, we worked with Duke University and Stanford University to look across ocean industry in 8 particular sectors, both of publicly listed and private, to say, what actually is the disclosure that these companies are making? How are they measuring, their impact on the ocean, whether that be through carbon emissions, nature, et cetera, and how are they tracking it, et cetera. And really, the first answer is they're not disclosing. There's very little disclosure in ocean industry on ocean and impact there. So, that's the first lesson. So we went a step further to say, okay, well, let's look at if there's, even the information out there, and if there were to be the information, is there the will to do something about it? And we took a look at the major investors of 8 ocean industry sectors and realized that, first of all, even if they had the desire to kind of better the performance and the impact of the companies that they're investing in, think about shipping, shipbuilding, offshore renewables, et cetera, the impact on ocean and nature, they don't have the tools to do it. And so this is where disclosure comes in. We already had established that there's very little disclosure. So in terms of this transition, we need to create the data that's kind of standardized, that can be easily replicated, so that we can start to see, how to make some improvement in the impact on the ocean. Without the data, and without easily replicable ways that don't require, novel concepts, which with each disclosure and become very expensive for investors, there's going to be very little change in the first place, even if they have the will in these times.
Well, Suzanne, thanks so much for sort of setting up the theme so well, and I'd love to turn to you, Alfredo, for your thoughts on this, and I would love to hear maybe from all of you, how, first of all, there's issue, as you say, of getting the data, but then who will insist that companies then report that data that pertains to their own companies?
Well, thank you so much, Dominic. So let me start by addressing a little bit the point of where are we today? And I think that just from personal experience, what I can tell you is that we have been in a long journey on the climate conversations, but the nature conversations are just starting to take off. And in 2024, during the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos, I spent quite a bit of time talking to different corporates and trying to understand, okay, the TNFD, the Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosures, was just open for companies to sign up to it. There was a very strong signal on day one. And then I gave myself the task of asking some of the companies, what are going to be the actions that you are going to take now that you are signaling that you are going to do this? And I can tell you that in 2024, there was still a lot of confusion, because the first answer was, we are going to continue decarbonizing. And I was like, that's important, but that's not completely nature. That is not what this is supposed to do. Fast forward, we get to September of last year, and I could already see that the teams had been built to address this in a very serious way. Then we get to 2025, and we have the current geopolitical landscape. So the first thing that we saw was a public step back from many of these commitments. Some companies, unfortunately, some banks particularly, taking a step back even in the staffing that is going to be addressing some issues. But not everything is dark. There are some companies that are just not going out there as publicly anymore, but that are doing the good work. And there's a lot of initiatives out there that are still supporting that good work. And I think that from our perspective, what we are focusing on is on two things. Number one, there's already all of these investments in climate. There's all of this momentum in nature. How do we build synergies between those two things so that you don't have to think about different teams and new commitments and new things? Like, how do we help you draw some of those things, some of those links? The second thing is, how do we continue to inform what does it actually mean to be nature positive, nature regenerative? And so, for example, we just published a series of reports, one for ports, in which we will be partnering with the Lloyd's Register Foundation to take it to the next level on implementation, and one for offshore wind, on what are some of the concrete actions that companies can take to draw those synergies between nature and climate, and then to advance even further the nature positive components. So just to say, I'm trying to address the question of, yes, there is a slowdown. Yes, there is some difficulties that we are going to face, but by far the momentum is not completely lost. A lot of this good work continues to happen. The teams are still there, and the institutions that are willing to support this are still going strong, albeit some slowdowns. But yeah.
Well, let's in a minute come back to both the new political landscape, and let's also explore at a more positive level some of the synergies between nature and climate, and think about sort of regenerative approaches. So we'll come back to that. But I'd love, please, to now invite Nino to speak a bit. It's great to have your industrial perspective. Shipping is 3% of emissions, but that's not the only impact that shipping makes, of course, on the ocean. How do you see things here in the area of transitions?
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you everyone for having us. As a shipping company doing business for over 100 years, we benefit from the ocean. Without the ocean, you don't need ships and you don't need ocean transport. So natural. But I think on the disclosures, we've been very clear and transparent on the emissions, GHG emissions, but when it goes to nature or the ocean conservation, I think we strongly follow the regulations, of course, and we do announce that publicly. But beyond that, what we have been able to present is our activities for a more corporate social responsibility perspective. We help grow the mangroves or protect the coral reefs, etc. But I must say the portion of those activities are far more limited than the efforts we put on GHG emissions. We also raised our hands as an early adopter of the TNFD, and through this process we have been engaging with the task force shipping members, and through the dialogue we learned a lot more what we can demonstrate, where we can do more, but also we see the kind of limit of our activity compared to the vast scale of the ocean and the many issues that many NGOs here in this room and this conference are addressing. So shipping has a positive and negative impact on the ocean nature, health, but there's a lot more to be addressed. And my reason why we are here is kind of to find out how, as an industry, we can do more, help more, or engage more with this big topic.
And since emissions really are remain the biggest impact for the shipping industry, give us a frank assessment about how quickly Mitsui OSK can decarbonize.
Well, thank you. So, as quite early as amongst our peers, we announced our vision to go to net zero by 2050. So we have set concrete milestones, and we not just say 2050 we'll get there. There's some time, so let's see how it goes. We are trying to reduce the emissions every year, step by step. So using all kind of available technologies or new technologies or better ways to operate. So we're working hard on the transition, but also we have a concrete goal to net zero by 2050. We need to. That's a total change of the fuels. So we are, which are very expensive. So we are hoping to encourage the IMO, the regulators of the industry, to set a regulation that kind of incentivizes the industry to use greener fuels. And there'll be a big discussion this April, so hopefully there'll be if there could be a strong signal or clarity of what kind of support is there, what kind of cost would be there for carbon, then the industry could take a stronger step forward. So that's where we are.
Not just companies, but countries too set targets, but are happy to ease off from those targets if the leaders do so first. So I think we should address the new political landscape, one dominated by Trump. And it's not just that the Trump administration doesn't care about ESG approaches or climate goals. It's actively hostile towards them. I would love to get the views from all three of you, but I'd first like to ask a room that is predominantly full of optimists how pessimistic they are about an ocean transition. Who is pessimistic now, given the new politics that's rippling out from the US? Who is pessimistic about this ocean transition? Not many of you. Who remains optimistic? Yoo-hoo! And so the optimists still win. In a year's time, perhaps we should take the poll again. But who is concerned? That's just to ask a more neutral thing, and that's the most number of hands. So yes, please, Suzanne, would you kick off here, just for your thoughts and views on on how politics affects things? Yeah.
Well, it is a different environment, but I would say that markets are not partisan. Markets are they're not elected, and financial markets operate on their own. They're their own voice, and so. Probably in what we're seeing is a very voluntary market now for ESG. Harm is still happening, and I would agree with Alfredo that certain companies and institutions continue to plug away at trying to make progress, recognizing that they are having an impact on the ocean and how can they improve. So all is not lost, but I do think the imperative is on us to start to connect more, particularly in this environment, science with then applied engineering that creates the infrastructure that the investors invest in to support, that ultimately is bought and traded in the markets. And so making that those links are imperative. And one way to do that, again, is to go back to data and to start to create a baseline of how you measure it, because even if harm is still being done in the ocean, how can we? It's a longer term harm. So how can we start to manage short-term value with longer-term risk? And that's through data, and we need data to measure impact, and we need these measurements in order to communicate to markets and manage long-term risk. And I think that kind of more practical language and developing those tools, and Alfredo and Nina, I can talk about the disclosure and the tools needed for it. That's the type of information and messages that resonate in this current climate. But let me just say something else is, we should have always been talking about this investment thesis. It's important to recognize the risks and what we face and the emergencies that we face, but we should always be talking in terms of infrastructure, growth, profit, jobs, and what are those opportunities that a more sustainable ocean economy presents to us. So it's a time to sharpen our investment thesis and figure that out.
Thank you. Alfredo.
Thank you. I cannot agree more with you, Susan, that we should always have been doing this. But the other thing is also that now there's real incentives to be talking about this. And first of all, this is an opportunity for the private sector to demonstrate some of that leadership. And there's some of these companies that are very publicly continuing to lead the way, and many others that are more privately. There's also some that are backtracking some steps, but that is fine. We just need to recognize that that is going to continue happening. The second thing is that I also completely agree that the message should be around science. Science is what really underpins many of these things. What underpins how do we estimate those risks? How do we estimate those profits sometimes? How do we think about the business case for many of these things? And the third thing is that I think that we really need to think much more about resilience. And this is one of the things that more and more we hear this message, right? Like it's whatever is happening in a partisan way in many different parts of the world is feeling the impacts of extreme weather events. And we don't have to call it climate change. We can call it, as Catherine Hayhoe says, we can call it climate weirding. And many people will agree that climate is weird now, and that there's more extreme events, and that there's different ways in which we are trying to rationalize this, but in the end, it leads to droughts in the Panama Canal that prevent us from going through some of the one of the most important channels. It leads to floods in some other places, etc. And I think that the argument of resilience, we need to transform it also into an economic resilience argument, much more directly linked to all of these things. And let me also give you another example. I think that one of the things, and I talked about this yesterday as well briefly, one of the things that we saw very quickly was the withdrawal or the freezing of some of the renewable energy projects around the world, not only the US actually. And some of these things have led almost to an identity crisis of the renewable energy sector, saying, are we back to when we needed to justify our existence? And the short answer is not that far, but we definitely need to be making a better case for this. And one of the things that we have been working on right now, precisely on this angle of resilience, is what are the other things that renewable energy provides that are not necessarily linked to the energy transition in itself, but to energy security at large. And so I can tell you that for many places, renewable energy is the fastest way to get the energy. It's probably the closest way to get the energy, the most efficient. And so those are the types of arguments that we need to be building. And if to that you add that it has very good benefits also for nature if you design it right and for local jobs, you need to make sure that you are generating those benefits in the communities as well, then you start having an argument. And so I think, unfortunately, the thing that led us to exploit this opportunity is what is happening today. But I completely agree with you, Susan, that this is what we should have been doing from the beginning, and hopefully we will come out stronger.
Yeah. I guess there are two ways to look at energy security. Either you turn in on yourself, which doesn't work very well if you live in a cloudy, windless country, or you reinforce collaboration with others. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out too. In Japan, both government and shareholders over the past decade, well, starting with Abe-san, have put a lot of emphasis on ESG, although chiefly on the G part. How do you look at sort of the changing politics, the changing geopolitics, and how that plays into the ESG debate and into the behavior of Japanese companies, including yours?
Thank you, Dominic. Very good questions or a point. You're correct in mentioning that starting from Abe-san, of course from before, but Abe-san very much emphasized ESG. I think the UN SDG goals, SDGs were a very kind of a natural thing for Japanese in general. It's kind of close to our heart, and also we managed to bring the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics at kind of the same time. So I think we as a nation we kind of felt, oh, Japan is gaining attention again, and then there's a good goal that we can just naturally resonate. So we should do it. So part of it was maybe top down from the government to let's do ESG, etc. But also I think it came bottom up. Every company or the management or the employees kind of felt, oh, we can take part in this SDG initiatives, etc. So, and in this geopolitical landscape, I felt very strongly supported or energized with Prime Minister Ishiba's speech. So he stated Japan's commitment to the conservation of the ocean, and I think we are relatively slow-moving but stable in a good way country. So despite these short-term trends, pro or against ESG. For the reason I kind of mentioned, it's very natural for Japanese. So I think we will carry on the ESG journey anyway. So to your question to the audience and ourselves, are you pessimistic or optimistic? I raised my hands on both because short term, I have to say I'm pessimistic or concerned for sure. But long term, we've seen human to put price on carbon, which is not a natural thing to happen. But although it took a few decades, that's happening, and probably that's why it makes sense for MOL to do a lot of effort to reduce our emissions and do a lot of reporting, because it's of course the good thing to do, but also it makes sense on business. So I'd really like to see that happen on the ocean field.
So important to rise above the immediate turmoil and keep one's eyes on the long-term goals. There's one issue I'm hoping we have time for to unpack, and that's the synergies between nature and climate. But it is time to open this session to the floor. We'd welcome your questions in the remaining 7 or so minutes. What questions do you all have for my panelists? And there are microphones at the back, sir. Oh, madam. I can't see your face, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Not madam,
Sir.
if I'm the one you mean. Just while I was listening to you off the top of my head, and there is the back of my head, I was curious, what about sanctions against the United States? There are all kinds of boycotts and things of that nature organized against other countries. But is there really nothing we can do about the intransigence of the current administration in the United States and the fact they're the largest seller of fossil fuels, largest producer of fossil fuels, and therefore likely to do a lot of damage in the next few years?
So sanctions. I mean, it's a huge topic, and it covers areas beyond our session's remit. But so far, would anybody like to respond to that? So far as a transition is concerned, is it a relevant issue? Is there anything that any of you would like to respond to?
I probably won't be able to answer your question directly, but all these new sanctions or new tariffs every week or maybe every day, and then saying we're not doing it after all next week. This doesn't help business, so well, just my comment, but yeah.
Thank you. You, sir, just in the center in front here. The microphone's on its way. Would you raise your hand for the benefit of my colleague there?
So it's not so much a question, but one of the things that you mentioned is how can we get support for the ocean in terms of shipping. I know ASK Line is doing their part in terms of GHG reductions, but we need support at the IMO. We go to the IMO every spring, every fall at MEPC to negotiate. And what we need is a collective support for this strategy, the 2023 IMO GHG strategy. Because if you have backtracking by the US and funding agency, what you have happen, because the fuel that we need for the transition is not quite there yet, and it's still in the research and development stage. Very few fuels are up there at the 9 level. They are all 3, 4 in technology readiness. So if you have funders resisting investing in new fuels, what happens is that you set our 2030 target back, you set our 2040 target back, and the same thing you do for our 2050 target. So what we need is a support for the technical measure of the IMO GHG strategy and the economic measure. Whether it's a levy, a universal levy, we are 2 weeks away from ISWG 19, which we are going to be fighting hell hard to have that support. But what we need is from the shipping companies and the countries that are represented at the IMO, because if you don't have that support for the delegates in there, it would be meaningless. And the time is not waiting on us. The ocean is not waiting on us. So what we need is the support. So I just want to say that we need the support from the NGOs, the governments, so that we can get that IMO. Our first target is 2030. That's how many years away? 5 years away. And the fuels that we need for the transition is not quite there yet. So,
well, you're all welcome to respond to that. I think Nino should. And I guess just to add to your question, I just wonder whether there's a distinction in the shipping industry between the very large firms in whose interest it might be for rapid transformation of fuels and the smaller carriers who are operating on slim margins and often are in the shadow economy.
I couldn't agree more. So we, as a Japanese shipping company, we of course engage with the Japanese government, who send a representative to the IMO discussions, and we are as a nation we are encouraging IMO's strong decision to incentivize the industry to go use these alternative fuels. We are also collaborating as an industrial platforms, such as the Global Maritime Forum, to raise our voice collectively and deliver it to the regulators. So definitely that's needed. And also, as you say, whilst maybe nations could change their policies every now and then, when it's a set goal by the IMO, it would be more resilient and helps us to kind of invest in those transitions.
Thank you very much.
And maybe just to add, I fully agree with you too, that we have, there's very few globally regulated industries, aviation, shipping, and this is an opportunity to support, a financial mechanism to bridge the gap between first shipping movers in order to start using future fuels, which right now are orders of magnitude higher than what ships currently burn. And there's a disconnect. We need the countries exactly to support the mechanism at the IMO, but there's the way we do this is probably to bring together the various ministries within country and to support that. So we have the transportation ministries working on IMO issues or related to that, but then it's kind of commerce, economics, finance, energy ministries that have a lot of interest in this as well, but they don't necessarily follow this issue as closely. We need to bring them together to build a coalition of support within countries, because the IMO is a collection of countries. It's almost the secretariat for the 180 countries who are in the IMO. So we absolutely need to get that ground level support working with the countries and rapido, because without this financial mechanism, we won't see progress.
Can I
Thank you, Susan.
share one?
Very briefly.
Very quickly. I would like to leave the room with a little bit more of the sense of optimism. A lot of the issues that we are talking about today go to issues like energy security, transportation, generation of jobs, growth. And if we don't capitalize on that, that's when we become pessimistic, and that's when we should be worried. And so I invite you all to think about your work in those terms and to continue supporting the coalitions and the projects that you have by inserting them into that global narrative and prioritization. So,
Alfredo, brilliant. You stole my closing remarks.
Sorry.
But it's wonderful and very germane, and great to get a sense not just from the panel but from the audience that it's possible to surf over the current political and policy turmoil and to make progress in this field. So would you please join me in thanking my fellow panelists, Alfredo, Nino, and Suzanne, in a great session.